My name is Mike Lundquist. I'm starting this YouTube channel for a couple of reasons. The first is to report a kind of terrible crime that the United States government is committing against its own citizens and against other citizens of other countries around the world. A crime that they committed against me as well as thousands of other people. The second reason is to talk about a couple of things that some other things that they've been doing that lots of people don't seem to be aware of, in terms of social engineering and other kinds of corruption that they're involved in. To get back to the first reason, I was a combat medic in the Army, in the United States Army. I went to Iraq during that time. To give you a brief story of what happened, first they flew us into Kuwait City when we first deployed to Iraq, and where our vehicles were waiting for us. And from there we drove north about 3 days, to where we were going in Balad, Iraq, and to a camp named Camp Anaconda. I drove a 5-ton truck that had all of the medical supplies for the whole battalion task force. And the guy who was in the passenger seat was my squad leader. His name was Sergeant Lee Totticini. And on the whole drive up, he told me that he knew he was going to be killed in Iraq. And it was suspicious. This was not a cowardly man. He was not afraid he was going to die. He knew he was going to die. Let me reiterate, this is not a cowardly man. He was a very solid, very dependable man. He was Navajo. He was a very good man. And it was clear that there was something going on there that I didn't know about. Nothing that I told him would change his mind. Well, very shortly after we got there, he was killed, and he was killed by friendly fire. And it was very, very suspicious circumstances that he was killed under. I was the first medic from our unit that actually showed up. There was another medic there who was a flight medic. And when I showed up, he was loading up a casualty or a wounded person, and I ran over to help him load this patient into the Black Hawk helicopter. And I returned to the other casualty that I was already told had died, but I didn't know who it was at the time. When I showed up and I saw him, I didn't recognize him at first because of the blast. It had broken the bones in his face. And but when I saw his name tag, I recognized, of course, the name tag, and I saw that it was Sergeant Totticini. Well, I immediately started asking questions from the people who were there, the squad that he was out on patrol with, and they told me that it was they had called in an artillery strike, and that instead of dropping the artillery on the enemy, our unit had dropped it directly on Sergeant Totticini. Well, I was very suspicious. I got sent back early from Iraq because of kidney stones, because of the heat, and because of the mineral water that they had us drinking. I started passing kidney stones every 4 or 5 days. So after a few months of that, 4 or 5 months of that, they eventually let me go back. And when I got back to the unit, I found out that they'd lied to his family. And they told his family that the enemy had killed him in an ambush. So I set about trying to gather evidence about it. And the only evidence that I could think of as far as documentation went, or at least the first thing that I thought of, was my journal. I kept a journal on the laptop that I used for medical supply back in Iraq, and I emailed the other members of my platoon, the other medics in my platoon, asking them to email me this text file, which Should have only taken a couple of minutes. They lived right next to the internet tent. It was maybe a 2 or 3 minute walk away. And they were there quite a bit, you know, I mean, whenever their duties allowed them to. You're pretty busy when you're deployed, but when they're not, the internet is something that you're doing a lot. So it should have only taken literally about 5 minutes to do. These are people I was just in combat with. So that shouldn't have been a problem, you know. These were my friends. These were my comrades, you know. And at first they told me, yeah, sure, no problem, we'll get it right to you. And then all of a sudden they all stopped talking to me. Immediately. All of them. And at about the same time, the people back at the unit on what's called rear detachment, the people who stay back at the unit while everyone else goes to a deployment, the chain of command back there started treating me differently, very badly. They started trying to find anything to screw me over about, you know. Long story short, they kicked me out of the Army. And they did it in a way that was improper, that even the Army Review Board admitted was improper and against Army regulations. I had to apply to the Army Review Board to overturn their decision so that I could get my GI Bill. At first they didn't have me my GI Bill, which was very bad. I was in a very bad place after, so I guess I can go more in depth into it later. I wrote a book about it, and I'm about to release it, which is another reason why I've started this YouTube channel, so that I can just so that I can let people see my face and let me give my own story in a way that people would be more prone to do rather than buy the book, you know. All of the proceeds are going to charity, but the truth is more important than making money for any reason, you know. And I think that this YouTube channel gives people a chance to look at me and make their own decisions rather than having to buy a book and read the book and decide from letters on a page whether I'm telling the truth or not. So to get back to the story, I tried to contact Sergeant Totticini's family a couple of times, and whenever I did, my whole life was just destroyed. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I figured it was PTSD. I would have these upwellings of terrible feelings and depression and despair, suffering. And I didn't really have any other explanation except for maybe PTSD. It was the only thing I could think of, you know. And so one day I woke up just feeling absolutely terrible, horrible, like an abomination of existence, terrible. Like all of my insides had been butchered up, ripped out of me, scrambled up, poisoned, spit on, and crammed back into me in no particular order, you know. I felt absolutely terrible. I lost my sense of balance. I had to learn how to carry myself again. I had trouble focusing with my right eye. I had trouble speaking again a little bit. I couldn't really figure out what was wrong with me. my life got even worse. Terrible things happened to me. Again, I go more in depth in the book, and maybe I'll put some more videos out explaining it in detail more. This is just the first video explaining why I started this, I guess. But for years this happened to me. It was like someone would go around destroying my life everywhere that I went. I moved to Oregon, and people started... It was like someone went around town spreading terrible rumors about me. I couldn't figure it out. Everyone in town just sort of treated me like a child molester. People would try to run me off the road. People would yell at me, spit at me. People would just treat me very poorly. People did really awful stuff to me, and I couldn't figure out why. It got to the point where I was staying locked in my house 24 hours a day, except for I would go shopping at Walmart at 2 o'clock in the morning to get groceries so that nobody else was around. When I left my house, it was awful. It was a wretched existence, and it continued for years. It was really terrible. And then one day I heard about this plant called iboga. Iboga is a plant that's native to Africa. It has lots of wonderful medicinal properties. It has therapeutic value, immense therapeutic value. And it has a huge effect on the neurological system, which is why it was good for me. Well, it's illegal in the United States through flagrant corruption. That's another story. I'll maybe have another video for that. But so I went to Costa Rica to take it to this clinic. It cost me quite a bit of money, but it was the best money I ever spent in my life. It changed my life. It was like a switch was flipped in my brain. It's something that was wrong before suddenly got better. I had no explanation for it. I just figured maybe there was some kind of neurological component to this depression that I didn't really understand before, but the iboga just fixed by itself. And so so I moved to Costa Rica, and immediately these things vanished. I felt better all the time. I lived there for a year, and I didn't have these problems. People didn't hound me and treat me terribly, and I made really good friends in Costa Rica, and some of them were yoga instructors, very, very good people. Some of the best I've ever met in my life. And they invited me to go with them to India. I guess I can get into all that stuff later, but when I came back to the States, eventually I noticed that this started happening again. Not just the depression and the despair and these strange surges of emotion, but also these people treating me terribly, and I had no idea why. I'm polite to most people I meet. I don't, or else I'm either polite to them or I don't talk to them at all. I don't cause problems. I don't, I'm not a confrontational dude. I'm a good person. I like to help people. And I couldn't figure it out, and it really bothered me because it had been a year and a half or so since it had stopped, and I just figured that it was over, and so it really bothered me that it wasn't. And so I was praying a lot. I was doing yoga. I was chanting a mantra. I was doing spiritual practices, meditating, stuff like that. But when I was in the States, it was different. There was something going on that I didn't understand. And on October 20th of 2015, I took some Iboga, which I do take it within the borders of the United States. I know it's illegal, but it's only illegal through corruption. And crooked laws are not laws, they are crimes. A politician can't pass any law that he wants and claim that it's legal to throw someone in jail for it. And I will defend my right to take a medication in any court of law, any kangaroo court that the United States government will throw at me, even if they'll send me to jail. It's my right to take a medication, a natural medication that's only illegal through corruption, whether the court agrees with me or not. Well, the summer of 2015 I took Iboga quite a bit. If you take a huge amount of it, and I mean a huge amount, it can be hallucinogenic, but I was taking very small amounts. It's almost impossible for me to take enough Iboga to hallucinate. In fact, I probably could eat less nutmeg. Nutmeg will make you hallucinate if you take enough of it. Probably less nutmeg would make me hallucinate rather than Iboga. So what happened next is definitely not, for certain, not a hallucination of any sort. I would stake everything on that. That is the absolute truth. So I took some Iboga one morning, and I went to the library. I was processing I decided to go back to India because these things were happening in the States, and I couldn't figure out why. It was really bothering me, so I went to go get a visa, another visa, to go back to India, and I had to send some paperwork to the company that was, processing my visa. And I didn't have internet where I was staying, and so I drove to this library nearby that was maybe 2 miles away. And I took the Iboga right before I left, and usually it took about 2 hours to hit me. And even when it did hit me, it was such a small amount that it actually increases your mental acuity. It's proven to help treat Alzheimer's and Parkinson's for that reason. So it wouldn't have hindered my driving ability at all. And I still thought I had plenty of time from the time I took it, to go to the library and come back before it would hit me. Well, it took me longer than I thought that it would at the library. It took me about 2 hours there, and so by the time I left, it was starting to come on. And as I started to pull out of the driveway, I noticed that there was a guy standing by the outlet to the parking lot. And he looked really suspicious. He looked back at me to check to make sure that I was coming, and he kind of sidestepped into place, like sidestepped into place next to the outlet, so where I would have to drive by him. And it looked really suspicious, and so it caught my attention. And the guy looked really familiar. And so I kept my eye on him. And so I pull out to the outlet, and I go to turn, Well, hitchhiking's pretty common in this area, and or in that area where I was at. And somebody pulled over to pick him up. He was hitchhiking, but he waved him off. So I get up there, and he almost jumps in front of the car, waves his hand over the hood, inches from the windshield. He definitely wanted me to pick him up, and I said, no, I don't pick up hitchhikers anyway. I mumbled an excuse, which the windows were rolled up. It was kind of silly for me to even do that, but when I told him no, he looked like he didn't look angry or disappointed. He looked like he was surprised, like he couldn't believe that I said no. And it was really suspicious, especially with everything else that he'd been doing. And So I waved him off. I drove back, the 2 miles back to where I was staying. And I started getting flashes of this guy in my memory. And I couldn't remember who he was. I didn't know where we were, what we were doing. I had no context for these little flashes of memory. I'd never experienced anything like that before. One of the things that Iboga is scientifically proven to do is increase neuroplasticity. That's your brain's ability to make new connections. And that's how the Iboga came into effect here. So, So I get back to where I'm staying, and I thought about it the rest of the day. I had trouble sleeping that night because I just was thinking about it. I was just picking at these memories, trying to figure out where I knew this guy from. He looked like a terrible person, not anybody I would want to know, but I knew that I knew him. And I knew that I knew him well. So the next day I went about my usual routine. I did yoga in the morning. I decided to take a little bit more Iboga. Again, a very small amount. I drank some coffee, or I made some coffee, and I went out to this little spot in the trees where I like to write. It's something that I really love to do. I'm trying to publish books. Anyway, that's another story. So I get out to my little spot, and there's a bunch of sandhill cranes that are flying overhead. I mean, hundreds of them, if not thousands. They have a very distinctive kind of a crooning kind of a call, and they were getting ready to migrate south for the winter, and there were 3 just giant flocks doing figure eights and circles above me, and all their calls all together had this kind of resonating effect. It was kind of psychedelic, kind of. It had this strange effect on my brain. Well, Iboga can unsettle your stomach a little bit, and I smoked a little bit of cannabis to settle my stomach. It was not, again, a very small amount. I'd done this several times before and since. They just very small amounts of both. Well, this resonating effect suddenly started making this reaction happen in my brain, and it was something that I could tell that it was happening, but I didn't know what it was. It was like this surge of energy, came up through the right side of my body into my brain, and it was this. It was very strange. It was connected to my right ear, and hearing this very strongly. Well, it built and built and built, and I knew it was about to happen, and all of a sudden it triggered this reaction. I felt my brain actually tremble. It was the strangest feeling I've ever had, and all of a sudden it felt like, I know this sounds crazy or whatever, but it felt like the hand of God reached down and untwisted something in my brain, something in the back of my brain, and that popped. What it felt like is it popped something up, like my part of my mind had been folded over the right side of my brain, and when this reaction happened, it felt like it popped that open, and it started fluttering like a tarp, or like a tarp fluttering in the wind or something. And all of a sudden I had access to these memories that had been shut away, that had been deliberately locked away. Back in the 1970s, the United States government got caught committing crimes against humanity. This is not a conspiracy theory. They had to admit to it in congressional hearings in front of Congress, on international television broadcast to the far corners of the globe. This is an irrefutable fact. This fact is that they had a program that they developed starting as soon as World War II ended. They needed a way to make Soviet spies talk, and so they used these Nazi scientists that they granted amnesty to develop this program trying to figure out how to manipulate the brain in order to get people to do what they wanted. Well, the Nazi scientists were terrible people. They did absolutely atrocious things. They were known for that. They were known to do unspeakable things to people to get results. And this was the kind of people who started this program. It became known as MK Ultra, this program. And when they got caught doing it in the 70s, the CIA, which was the group of the government who was doing this, they said, "Oh, no, we've already stopped doing that, we promise. We decided not to," right? Well, thousands of people since then have all reported that they're still doing this. They're still doing this to people, thousands of people all over the world. I mean, literally thousands. And these are the people that have broken out of this mental manipulation and decided to tell people about it. Because this sounds like something very crazy, and so a lot of people who broke out, the mind is a very adaptive thing, you know. So those people whose minds broke out of it, among those, a lot of them probably never reported it because they knew it would destroy their reputation. They knew that people wouldn't believe them, you know. And thousands of people have reported this. Those are the people who broke out and decided to report it. Thousands of people. I can tell you without any doubt that this is happening. And I can tell you that because it happened to me. You might be able to tell, I don't know if this will show up on the video, but my face is asymmetrical. And the reason for that is because this right side of my face, this right side of my brain is the side of my brain that they use to condition this mental construct in my mind. Basically what they do is they create a split personality through terrible trauma. And then they condition that split personality through more trauma into this masochist, this thing that has to decide to enjoy suffering because the suffering gets way too intense. It switches, and it has to decide to enjoy it. They create this split personality, and then they warp it into this personality that will do anything that it's told. And they have a way that they activate this personality. I'll go into that later, I guess. That's what they did to me. They did that to me to discredit me because of what happened to my squad leader and because I was trying to report them for this. If you are a crooked government and you go around killing everybody who reports you for crimes, then everyone's going to know that people are telling the truth about you very quickly. The better way to do it then is to discredit people. Because what that'll do is, even if somebody tells the truth about you or about a crooked government, then no one will believe them. Even if the word gets out, they don't have to worry about it. And that further discourages anybody else from coming forward, because if they think that all that's going to happen is that they're publicly ridiculed, called crazy, maybe even get admitted to a psych ward or something, people won't come forward. They'll keep quiet about it. This happened to me. I swear to you that this happens.